George Washington. A full-length biography. Origins and early colonial life. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, into a world shaped by colonial expectations, plantation life, and British imperial influence. His family was part of the middling gentry, respected but not among the wealthiest planters. Washington's father, Augustine Washington, managed several plantations and worked as a justice of the peace. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, was known for her discipline, resilience, and strong-willed personality. Young George grew up in a society where land ownership defined power. The Washingtons were comfortable but not affluent, and George's early life reflected the values of hard work, modest privilege, and ambition. After Augustine died when George was 11, the family's wealth contracted. Unlike his older half-brothers, he did not receive a formal education in England, but he absorbed the mathematics, surveying skills, and practical knowledge typical for young colonial gentlemen. From an early age, Washington stood out for his physical presence. Tall, athletic, and dignified, he excelled at horsemanship and outdoor skills. These traits later contributed to his public persona as a man seemingly destined for leadership. But at this stage of his life, he was a teenager navigating the Virginia frontier, eager for opportunity and social advancement. The making of a surveyor. As a young man, Washington embraced surveying, one of the more prestigious professions available to someone outside the highest ranks of society. Surveying required mathematical skill, precision, and endurance. More importantly, it allowed Washington to explore and understand the vast lands of western Virginia and the frontier beyond. At age 17, he became the official surveyor for Culpeper County. This job enabled him to acquire land himself, an important step in rising socially. His surveying expeditions into rugged wilderness built not only his reputation but also practical experience in dealing with complex environments, Native American communities, and the physical demands of frontier life. Land was wealth in colonial Virginia, and Washington understood that early. By his early 20s, he had accumulated valuable properties and was establishing himself as a member of the landed gentry. But a larger world was about to open before him, one shaped by imperial conflicts and the shifting balance of power between Britain, France, and Native American nations. The French and Indian War. A baptism by fire. Washington's first major military experience came during the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the global 7 Years' War. At 21, he was appointed a major in the Virginia militia. In 1753, he volunteered for a dangerous mission, to deliver a message to the French demanding they abandon their newly built forts in the Ohio Valley. His journey through harsh winter terrain impressed Virginia's governor and elevated his name throughout the colonies. The following year, Washington returned to the frontier with a small force, leading to the skirmish at Jumonville Glen, an encounter that inadvertently helped ignite a global conflict. The subsequent Battle of Fort Necessity was a humbling defeat. Washington's hastily built fort proved inadequate, and he surrendered to the French, signing a document, poorly translated, that implied he had admitted to assassinating a French officer. It was an embarrassment, but it also taught him invaluable lessons in leadership, logistics, and the brutal realities of war. Later, he served as an aide to British General Edward Braddock during the disastrous 1755 expedition to capture Fort Duquesne. Braddock was killed, and Washington helped organize a chaotic retreat, demonstrating bravery under fire. His performance earned him respect and admiration, especially from the Virginia Assembly. Washington's experiences during the French and Indian War forged his military identity. He gained a reputation for courage, learned the importance of discipline, and witnessed the limitations of colonial troops under rigid British command. Planter, husband, and gentleman. After the war, Washington retired from military service and returned to civilian life. In 1759, he married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow. Though Martha brought considerable property and 2 children from her previous marriage, the union was also affectionate, stable, and mutually supportive. Mount Vernon became Washington's world. He expanded the estate, experimented with agricultural methods, and shifted from tobacco to wheat farming due to the economic realities of the time. Washington was both master and manager, a role that included overseeing enslaved labor. Like many Virginia planters, Washington relied heavily on enslaved people to maintain his agricultural operations. During this period, Washington entered the Virginia House of Burgesses, establishing himself as a community leader. His military reputation, marriage into wealth, and growing landholdings transformed him into one of Virginia's most prominent men. He dressed elegantly, practiced social etiquette, and cultivated an image of honor, duty, and stoicism. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, political tensions were brewing between the colonies and Great Britain, tensions that would soon draw Washington back into public service on a far grander stage. The road to revolution, the 1760s and early 1770s, marked a period of escalating conflict between Britain and its American colonies. Taxes like the Stamp Act and Townshend Acts, as well as the British military presence in America, fueled dissatisfaction. Washington, though conservative by nature, grew increasingly critical of British policies. His frustrations stemmed from both ideology and personal experience. As a Virginia planter, he was affected by trade restrictions and debts owed to British merchants. As a military officer, he resented the condescension shown by British authorities toward colonials. By the early 1770s, Washington supported non-importation agreements and served as a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congresses. Though he was not a fiery orator, his quiet determination, military knowledge, and impeccable reputation made him a natural candidate for leadership. On June 15, 1775, Congress appointed George Washington Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He accepted reluctantly, understanding the immense challenges ahead. The fight for independence had begun. The struggle of command. Washington inherited an army that was poorly trained, poorly supplied, and frequently disorganized. The British military was among the most powerful in the world. Yet Washington brought to his command moral authority, patience, and an unshakable belief in the cause of American independence. Early victories around Boston showed promise, but the New York campaign in 1776 was catastrophic. Washington's forces were outmaneuvered and forced to retreat through New Jersey. Morale plummeted. Many thought the revolution was doomed, but Washington refused to surrender hope. In December 1776, he crossed the icy Delaware River and launched a surprise attack on the Hessian forces in Trenton. A week later, he won another victory at Princeton. These daring maneuvers revived the American cause and became legendary examples of strategic audacity. His challenges, however, were far from over. Page 7, Hard Years and Hard Choices. The winter at Valley Forge in 1777-1778 became a symbol of hardship and resilience. Thousands of soldiers suffered from cold, hunger, and disease. Washington's leadership during these desperate months solidified his relationship with his troop. He advocated relentlessly for supplies and reforms. The arrival of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, transformed the Continental Army. Von Steuben introduced rigorous training, discipline, and standardized drills. Washington supported these reforms wholeheartedly, understanding that professionalism was essential to victory. Meanwhile, political factions within Congress and even among his own officers sometimes sought to undermine him. The so-called Conway Cabal attempted to replace him. Yet Washington's steady character and broad support ultimately prevailed. He emerged from these trials stronger, more respected, and more determined. Page 8, Victory and a New Nation. The turning point came in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia. Washington coordinated with French forces, both on land under General Rochambeau and at sea under Admiral de Grasse, to trap British General Cornwallis. The siege was decisive. Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, giving the Americans and their French allies a stunning victory. Although the war did not officially end until the Treaty of Paris in 1783, Yorktown effectively broke Britain's will to continue fighting. Washington was hailed as a hero, but he did something remarkable. He voluntarily resigned his military commission and returned to Mount Vernon. His retirement shocked the world. In an age when victorious generals often seized political power, Washington's action demonstrated the values of republicanism and civilian control of the military. King George III reportedly said that if Washington relinquished power and returned to private life, he would be the greatest man in the world. Washington did exactly that. Page 9. The constitutional crisis piece brought new challenges. The Articles of Confederation, America's first governing document, proved too weak to manage national problems. The United States faced economic instability, interstate rivalries, and security concerns. Washington watched with growing concern. He hoped to stay retired but recognized the nation's dire condition. When a constitutional convention was proposed in 1787, he was unanimously chosen to preside. Washington played a mostly silent role during the debates, rarely speaking but guiding the process with his presence and authority. His support for the final document, the U.S. Constitution, was essential to its acceptance. With a new government established, the next question became who would lead it. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected the first President of the United States. His service to the nation was not yet over. Page 10. The First Presidency. Setting precedents, Washington entered office in New York City, then the temporary capital. He and the nation faced enormous uncertainty. What did a president do? How should he act? What powers did he truly hold? Washington understood that every decision would establish precedent. He selected a talented cabinet, including Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. Their conflicting visions for America, Hamilton's strong centralized government versus Jefferson's agrarian-focused liberty, reshaped American politics. Among Washington's major accomplishments: establishing executive authority, supporting Hamilton's financial plan to stabilize the economy, creating the first bank of the United States, maintaining neutrality in the French Revolution's early phases, signing the Bill of Rights, managing the Whiskey Rebellion with minimal bloodshed. Washington navigated these challenges with caution, dignity, and a deep sense of national responsibility. Page 11. Diplomacy and the struggle for neutrality. The 1790s were marked by violent conflict between Britain and France. Both nations pressured the young United States to join their cause. Many Americans supported revolutionary France, remembering its crucial assistance during the war. Others preferred closer ties with Britain due to economic interest. Washington, however, believed the country was too young, too fragile, and too militarily vulnerable to enter a major European war. In 1793, he issued the Proclamation of Neutrality, declaring that the United States would remain impartial. This decision was controversial. Critics accused Washington of abandoning France. Supporters praised his realism. The Jay Treaty, negotiated with Britain in 1794, further inflamed debate. Though it preserved peace and stabilized commerce, Jeffersonian Republicans saw it as favoring British interests. Washington approved the treaty because he believed it prevented war. His foreign policy established a long-lasting principle: the United States should avoid entangling alliances when possible. Page 12. Washington's personal struggles. While Washington commanded respect, he was not immune to criticism. Newspapers, freed by the expanding power of the First Amendment, attacked him with increasing intensity during his second term. Some accused him of monarchical ambitions. Others denounced his support for Hamilton's financial policies. Washington found these attacks deeply painful. Sensitive by nature, he struggled with the bitterness of emerging partisan politics. Yet he continued to govern with restraint and commitment. Beyond politics, Washington dealt with personal challenges at Mount Vernon. His plantations struggled financially, often due to poor soil and the inefficiency of the slave-based economy. Over time, Washington's views on slavery evolved. While he did not publicly champion abolition, he privately expressed discomfort with the institution. In his will, he became the only founding father to free all enslaved people under his direct ownership. Page 13, The Farewell Address. By 1796, Washington longed to return to private life. Age and fatigue weighed on him. After 2 terms, then an informal limit, he decided to step down. With the help of Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, he wrote his farewell address, one of the most influential speeches in American history. In it, Washington warned against political parties and factionalism, foreign entanglement, regional divisions between North and South, excessive national debt. His words echoed through generations of statesmen, shaping American political thought well into the 20th century. Washington's voluntary decision to relinquish power for a second time cemented his legacy as a leader of extraordinary character. Page 14, Retirement at Mount Vernon. Returning to Mount Vernon, Washington hoped for peace and routine. He managed his farms, improved buildings, and entertained a constant stream of visitors eager to see the hero of the Revolution. Though retired from public service, he remained a symbol of unity and national identity. Washington continued to confront the financial struggles common to plantation owners. He also carefully considered the fate of the enslaved people under his control. His will, written in 1799, ordered that they be freed upon Martha's death and urged care for the elderly, sick, and young among them. Although he never fully renounced slavery as an institution during his lifetime, this act set him apart from many of his contemporaries and reflected his evolving conscience. Page 15, The Quasi-War and Final Service. Despite retirement, Washington could not fully escape national duty. In 1798, tensions between the United States and France erupted during the so-called Quasi-War. President John Adams called upon Washington to lead a provisional army should full-scale war break out. Washington accepted reluctantly, insisting that Alexander Hamilton serve as his second-in-command. Though he did not oversee active combat and the crisis diminished before war erupted, his willingness to serve again demonstrated his lifelong dedication to the nation he helped create. It was his final act of public service. Page 16, Washington's final days. In December 1799, after riding through his estate during freezing rain and snow, Washington developed a severe throat infection, likely acute epiglottitis or bacterial laryngitis. At the time, medical practices such as repeated bloodletting weakened him further. On the evening of December 14, 1799, George Washington died in his bedroom at Mount Vernon. His last recorded words were, "'Tis well." News of his death spread rapidly. Across the nation, citizens mourned the man who had led the Continental Army, guided the Constitutional Convention, and served as the first president. Samuel Taylor Coleridge called him, "the most perfect character the world has ever produced." Washington's passing marked the end of an era, but his legacy was just beginning to shape the identity of the American Republic. Page 17, Legacy and Leadership. Washington's legacy goes far beyond his military victories or political accomplishment. He established essential norms for American leadership. Civilian control of the military. Washington resisted the temptation of personal power. Voluntary relinquishment of authority twice. He stepped down when he could have ruled. Nonpartisanship and unity. He sought national harmony above personal ambition. A strong but restrained executive branch. His presidency defined the modern American executive. Integrity and personal discipline. His character shaped public expectations of a president. Washington was not perfect, No leader is, but he possessed a rare combination of humility, strength, and moral restraint. Page 18, Washington and Slavery. A complicated legacy. No biography of Washington is complete without confronting the moral contradictions of his life. While he led a revolution based on liberty, he also owned enslaved people throughout most of his life. Washington's views evolved over time. Early in life, he accepted slavery as part of Virginia society. Later, he expressed increasing discomfort, especially after the Revolution. He stopped selling enslaved individuals to prevent families from being separated. In his will, he freed all enslaved people he directly controlled. Though far from modern standards, his evolving stance illustrates a personal struggle with the institution and places him among the few founding fathers who took meaningful personal action toward emancipation. Page 19, Global Impact. Washington's influence extended beyond the United States. In Europe, political thinkers marveled at his decision to surrender power. Napoleon held him in high regard. The British Parliament honored him after his death, an extraordinary gesture from a former enemy. Revolutionaries in Latin America, such as Simón Bolívar, saw Washington as a model of patriotic leadership. His presidency demonstrated that a republic could thrive after overthrowing monarchical rule. Washington's global legacy is tied to the idea that true leadership is rooted in restraint, service, and commitment to principle rather than ambition. Page 20. The enduring symbol of a nation. George Washington's life is woven into the fabric of American identity. His name adorns cities, monuments, the capital of the United States, and countless institutions. His image appears on currency, statues, and in the collective imagination of the country. Washington represents the struggle for independence, the birth of the nation, the ideals of republican government, the virtues of duty, sacrifice, and honor. His life story illustrates how one individual, guided by principle and sustained by perseverance, can help shape the destiny of a nation. From his humble beginnings as a young surveyor to his role as commander-in-chief and, ultimately, as the first president of the United States, Washington's journey reflects the broader story of the American experiment. He remains a symbol of unity and leadership, an enduring reminder of the challenges and triumphs that shaped the United States.